It's one of the most recognizable and frankly delightful creations in popular culture, a disembodied human hand scuttling around on its fingertips like a pale spider. It can be a valet, a confidant, a co-conspirator, a source of 1,000 sight gags. It's Thing from the Addams family. Specifically, it's the version of Thing that became famous in the 1990s films, a fully mobile, independent character with a distinct personality. For decades, audiences have laughed at the antics of the hand, enjoying its strange, macabre charm. It's a perfect piece of the Addams aesthetic, morbid, funny, and strangely wholesome, but that character, the friendly, free-roaming hand, is a revision. It's a simplification of a concept that was originally far more ambiguous and, in its own quiet way, much more unsettling. The creation that Charles Addams drew in his New Yorker cartoons was never just a hand. It was simply the only part you were allowed to see. To understand what was altered, we first have to document the version that has taken its place. The received form of Thing is a product of television. When producer David Levy was developing the 1964 sitcom based on Addams's cartoons, he faced a significant challenge. The cartoons were static images, single panels relying on macabre suggestion and visual irony. They had no recurring plots, and the characters, while visually distinct, had no established names or consistent personalities. Levy and his team had to invent much of the lore we now take for granted, including the names Morticia, Gomez, and Wednesday, and they had to figure out what to do with a recurring background presence in the cartoons, an entity referred to only as Thing. The solution they devised was a masterstroke of practical production design and comedic efficiency. Thing became a hand and forearm, typically emerging from a series of decorative boxes placed around the Addams home. This decision was born of necessity. How do you film an unseen presence on a sitcom budget? How do you make it a repeatable gag? The answer was to give it a single, consistent point of contact with the world. Ted Cassidy, the towering actor who also played Lurch, was typically the man behind the hand. He would lie on his back on a wheeled dolly below the set, his arm extended up through the bottom of a box. The effect was simple, effective, and endlessly versatile. This Thing could hand Gomez a cigar, snap its fingers to music, or wave a tiny white flag in surrender. Its personality was that of a loyal, if occasionally mischievous, servant. It was a known quantity. The box was its home. The hand was its entirety. The showrunners even gave it a counterpart, a female hand named Lady Fingers, reinforcing the idea that this was a species of sentient, disembodied limbs. The audience understood the joke instantly. It was weird, it was funny, and it was safe. There was no mystery beyond the physical comedy of the prop itself. When the Addams Family was rebooted for the big screen in 1991, director Barry Sonnenfeld and his team faced a new choice. They could replicate the hand-in-the-box gag, or they could use the advances in special effects to do something new. They chose the latter. Using a combination of puppetry, prosthetics worn by magician Christopher Hart, and early digital composite work, they liberated Thing from its container. Now it was a fully mobile, disembodied right hand, capable of incredible speed and dexterity. This Thing could race through the mansion's corridors, perform complex tasks, communicate through a form of sign language, and express a wide range of emotions. It became a fully fledged character, an animal companion with the intelligence of a person. This is the version that has dominated the public imagination for the last 30 years. It is clever, loyal, and heroic when it needs to be. It's a pet, a friend, a sidekick. But in making Thing more visible, more active, and more understandable, the filmmakers moved it even further from its source. The process of simplification that began in 1964 was now complete. Thing had been fully domesticated. The first piece of evidence that points to a different origin is found not in what the 1964 show included, but in what Charles Addams's cartoons suggested. The show's creators isolated one specific visual, a hand performing an action, and built an entire character around it, but they ignored the context that surrounded that visual in the original panels. Addams's cartoons are built on what is left unseen. The humour often comes from a mundane reaction to a horrific or bizarre implication that exists just outside the frame, and Thing was frequently the subject of that implication. Consider a cartoon from 1954. It depicts the exterior of the Addams mansion. Next to the imposing front gate is a small, neat sign, the kind you might see warning of a dog. It reads, simply, "Beware of the Thing." Inside the gate, members of the family are looking back toward the house with expressions of fond, slightly nervous concern. Let's examine this exhibit closely. The sign itself is the first clue. Beware. This is not a word one associates with the helpful, harmless hand of the television show. It implies a potential for harm, a need for caution. The family's reaction is the second clue. They are not laughing. They seem to be checking on something or perhaps waiting for it to calm down. The critical element, however, is that we, the viewers, cannot see what they see. The source of the warning is hidden. Addams is deliberately creating a sense of dread and mystery. The joke is the juxtaposition of a suburban convention, a "beware of the dog" sign, with an unknowable and presumably monstrous entity. The television show took the name, but discarded the menace. The gag in the cartoon is that the Addams family keeps a genuine, dangerous-sounding creature as a pet. The gag in the show is that their pet is just a hand. The two concepts are fundamentally different. The cartoon relies on imagination and dread. The show relies on a visual punchline. Another piece of evidence reinforces this idea of an unseen presence. A panel shows a terrified mailman, his hand recoiling from the mail slot in the Addams front door. Inside the slot, in the oppressive darkness of the house's interior, a pair of eyes stare out. A caption, presumably Morticia speaking to Gomez, reads, "It's the mailman, darling. He's frightened." Again, the structure is the same. The reaction of a normal person, fear, is contrasted with the Addams' casual acceptance of the source of that fear. And again, the source is almost entirely concealed. We see only its eyes. Are these things eyes? The cartoon doesn't explicitly say, but it strongly suggests a creature that lives within the fabric of the house itself, observing the outside world from the shadows. This is not a hand in a box. This is a resident, a watcher. It has eyes. It is an organism, not just an appendage. The mailman is not scared of a disembodied hand trying to take the mail. He is scared of the intelligent, hidden creature looking at him from the dark. This pattern of concealment is the most consistent element of Thing's depiction in the original cartoons. Addams understood that true horror and true comedy in his specific vein came from suggestion, not revelation. He almost never showed the full monster. He showed the shadow it cast. He showed the reaction it provoked. The family's casual relationship with these unseen horrors was the entire point. They were not just a quirky family with gothic taste. They were a clan who lived in peaceful, domestic harmony with things that would drive anyone else mad. And Thing was the primary embodiment of this idea. It was their housemate. It was the monster under the floorboards and inside the walls, and the family treated it with the same casual affection they showed each other. So where did the idea of a hand come from? It came from one of the very few cartoons where any part of Thing was made visible. The panel depicts the family gathered in their living room, listening to a record player. An ornate, old-fashioned phonograph is playing, and reaching out from within the machine's large morning glory horn is a human hand about to change the record. The The family looks on, pleased. This single image is the primary source, the exhibit zero for the television adaptation. The creators saw the hand and isolated it. They extracted it from the larger pattern of evidence. They saw a hand performing a helpful task and built a character around that action, ignoring the dozens of other instances that suggested something much larger and stranger. They mistook a part for the whole. They saw the tip of the iceberg and decided the entire thing was just a block of ice. This is where we move from the evidence in the art to the documented history of the creator himself. The bedrock of this investigation is found in Charles Addams's own notes and the recollections of those who knew him. According to numerous sources, including his biographer Linda H. Davis, Addams had a very specific conception of the character. Thing was not a disembodied hand. It was a complete living creature. It was simply so horrifyingly ugly and painfully shy that it preferred to remain hidden from view. It was a member of the family, but a deeply reclusive one who lived in the crawl spaces, dumbwaiters, and walls of the mansion. It would interact with the family and the outside world by extending only a part of itself into the room, sometimes an eye through a keyhole, sometimes a foot from under a curtain, and most often a hand from a box or a container. Think about what that means. Every time you saw the hand in an Addams cartoon, you were seeing the equivalent of a shy person sticking their hand out from behind a door to take something. The entity was whole, alive, and somewhere just out of sight. The name Thing was not a cute nickname, it was a literal description. It was an unnameable thing, a creature so outside the bounds of normal biology that it defied classification. And the family's attitude toward it was not one of master and servant. It was one of loving acceptance. They knew Thing was sensitive about its appearance, so they accommodated its desire for privacy. The boxes and containers weren't prisons, they were portals. They were safe access points that allowed their shy friend to be part of family life without the stress of being seen. This recontextualizes everything. Thing is not a magical oddity. It is a character with a discernible and rather poignant psychological motivation. It is a cryptid with social anxiety. This original concept is so much richer, so much stranger, and so much more in keeping with the core themes of the Addams family. The central idea of the family is the inversion of normality. A normal family would be terrified of a monster living in their walls. A normal family would call an exterminator or a priest. The Addams family gives it a name, respects its boundaries, and makes it a part of their daily lives. The horror is not that there is a monster in the house. The horror for an outsider is that the family loves it. They have domesticated the unknowable. This is a profoundly more radical idea than just having a disembodied hand for a butler. The hand is a simple gag. The shy, unseen monster is a complete worldview. So why was this complex, fascinating idea scrubbed away? The answer is television. The demands of a 1960s network sitcom were fundamentally incompatible with the kind of ambiguity Charles Addams specialized in. A weekly show needs clear, definable characters and repeatable situations. An unseen monster that only occasionally sticks a body part into the frame is a difficult character to write for. It's hard to give it consistent business. How do you build a scene around it? How do you sell it to a mainstream audience that wants comforting, predictable comedy? David Levy and his writers made a perfectly logical choice. They took the one tangible element of the character, the hand, and made it the entire character. They jettisoned the ambiguity and the existential dread because it was not commercially viable. The hand in the box was a brilliant piece of production design. It turned a conceptual character into a practical one. It created a reliable source of visual humour. It was, in short, a perfect adaptation for the medium of television, but it was also an act of profound sanitization. It stripped the concept of its mystery. Before the show, The question was, what is Thing? After the show, the question was, what will Thing do next? The focus shifted from its nature to its function. The character was flattened, simplified, and made safe for mass consumption. The deep, weird, philosophical joke at the heart of the original was replaced by a series of clever, but ultimately superficial, sight gags. The 1990s films, for all their gothic flair and visual inventiveness, completed this process. By liberating Thing from the box, they gave it more personality and agency than ever before. But they did so by reinforcing the idea that it was, and only ever was, a hand. In fact, the film's version is in some ways even less mysterious than the television version. The TV Thing was at least attached to an arm, implying a connection to something larger, even if that something was just Ted Cassidy on a dolly. The cinematic Thing is explicitly just a hand. It is a complete entity in itself. This is a fun, visually dynamic idea, but it's the final step away from the source. The original concept was about a complete creature that we could not see. The modern version is about a partial creature that we can see completely. The imaginative burden on the audience has been removed entirely. The loss of the original Thing matters because it subtly changes the nature of the Addams family itself. If Thing is just a clever, sentient hand, then the Addamses are collectors of curiosities. They are eccentrics who own a strange pet. It is an accessory to their weirdness. But if Thing is a reclusive, sentient monster living in their walls, then the Addamses are something else entirely. They are a family whose definition of family is expansive enough to include the truly monstrous. They are protectors of the strange guardians of a creature that the outside world would hunt and destroy. It makes their isolation from society not just a matter of taste, but a matter of necessity. They are a sanctuary. This adds a layer of depth and purpose to their clan that is lost in the translation. The modern Addamses are weird for fun. The original Addamses were weird on a fundamental, almost biological level. Their home was not just a collection of spooky objects, it was a functioning ecosystem for creatures that could not survive anywhere else. This change also reflects a broader shift in how popular culture treats the macabre. Addams's work was genuinely unsettling because it was quiet, it was rooted in suggestion, it allowed the reader's mind to imagine the horror. The humour came from the dissonance between the terrifying implication and the family's placid reaction. Later adaptations, in keeping with the general trend of the media, became more explicit. They needed to show the monster, and in showing it, they had to define it, categorize it, and ultimately render it less powerful. The free-roaming hand is a spectacular special effect. It is not, however, a source of genuine dread. It is an object of fun. The creature in the walls, the thing you can never see but whose presence is always felt, taps into a much more primal fear. By sacrificing that fear for a good gag, the adaptations lost a critical element of the Addams appeal. They became a collection of quirks rather than a living embodiment of a different, darker reality. We can track the evolution of the character as a process of increasing visibility and decreasing mystery. It begins as a presence, suggested but unseen. Then it becomes a pair of eyes in the dark. Then, for one moment, it is a hand. The television series seizes on that hand and makes it the character's primary form, but keeps it tethered, contained within a box, connected to an unseen body off-screen. The movies then sever that connection completely, creating a fully visible, fully independent entity. Each step makes things easier to understand, easier to film, and easier to laugh at. And each step erases a little more of the original's quiet power. The journey of Thing is a journey from the realm of the imagination into the realm of the tangible. And while the result is entertaining, something essential was lost in transit. The weirdness became less about a state of being and more about a style of performance. The evidence is clear: a consistent pattern of concealment in the source material, combined with the creator's own documented intentions, points to a creature far different from the one we know. The thing of the cartoons was a complete organism, a shy monster that was a beloved, if reclusive, member of the Addams household. The thing of television and film is a disembodied hand, a servant or a pet. The revision was a commercial and creative success, creating an iconic character that is loved by millions. But it is a replacement, not a translation. It is a different character that happens to share the same name. Understanding the original does not diminish the later versions, but it does place them in a new context. They are the public-facing, simplified versions of a much stranger and more poignant secret. The Addams family of the cartoons was not just playing at being creepy. They were living a life that was fundamentally, existentially different from our own, and the shy creature in their walls was the greatest proof. This brings us back to that first piece of evidence, the cartoon with the sign, "Beware of the thing." When we first look at it, we assume the sign is a warning to us, to the outside world. It's a classic monster trope, but with the full context, the meaning inverts. The Addams family is not warning visitors about their pet. They are protecting their family member from visitors. The sign is not for our safety, it is for things' comfort. Beware, it says, not because the creature is aggressive, but because it is shy. Tread carefully, speak softly. You are in the presence of something timid and rare. The warning is an act of love. The family is guarding their monster's privacy. They are protecting it from a world that would not understand. That single panel, re-examined through this lens, contains the entire lost story. It shows us a family that is not defined by ghoulish props, but by a radical act of acceptance. And it shows us a creature that was never just a hand. It was a whole hidden being, worthy of protection, a quiet resident of the strangest house in the world.